Hey, this is Jamie Stow with Stonemaier Games, and welcome to this week's live cast on Facebook. This is December 18th, in case you're watching this in the future on YouTube or listening to the podcast version of it. But yeah, let's jump right into it. I have a bunch of random stuff today, some stuff about Stonemaier, some random stuff about games and things going on in my life that I'll share, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions as normal. I am super excited about Star Wars. Episode 9 comes out this weekend. I'm going to see it on Sunday, so hopefully I'll avoid spoilers long enough. And I have avoided everything so far. I haven't looked at any articles about it. I haven't watched teaser trailers or anything like that. I want to go into it completely clean. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'm curious if you are excited about it as well. What else? Oh, I saw Jumanji this past weekend. Megan and I went to see the new Jumanji, and we watched the first Jumanji a few days before that. And I really enjoyed it. I think they're it's good, just popcorn entertainment, good fun movie. And the second one, I think I like the first one a little bit more than the second. The first one was a little bit more novel and new, but the second one did some things that I didn't expect. There were some nice surprises as well. So if you're just looking for like a fun movie to go watch, I would recommend Jumanji 2. We got a bunch of snow in St. Louis a couple days ago. It's still quite a bit of snow on the ground, and it kind of keeps melting and freezing. So some cold, snowy, icy days in St. Louis right now. But we're doing okay. It's nice. It's nice to be able to work from home. That's a nice perk when you have bad weather outside. I do enjoy. I run. If you don't know this, I run Stonemaier Games from my home office here, as you can see from the cat Biddy in the background there. Yeah, which is really nice. So my commute is very easy, and it's easy on days like this when you don't necessarily want to go outside. Joshua is the one who actually puts together the podcast from these videos. Joshua says, curious if I have a favorite go-to magic color or favorite creature type. Joshua loves blue merfolk. And Joshua, I think maybe he thought of this, as he mentions in the comment here, because I hosted a magic draft for Throne of Eldraine, the latest magic set. I hosted a draft for it on Saturday. There were 7 total people. And the way our draft format works is I buy all the packs and I keep all the cards. So I sell the cards afterwards. Sometimes I break even. Sometimes I lose a little bit. Sometimes I even make a little bit if the cards are really valuable. And we do a normal draft where we pass around the table. And then everyone plays each other person one time. So not one game, not one match. And so it usually takes around 4 hours or so. But you get to play against every other deck. There's no tournament format or anything like that. You're just trying to win as many games as possible. It's a ton of fun. And Joshua, to answer your question, on this draft, I drafted blue-green and had a lot of fun with it. So I usually like 2 color combinations. I often like red and green. I'd say red and green are the 2 that I most commonly go towards. I like the direct damage in red, the removal, and I like the fun creatures in green. Looks like Dusty Crane from The Mill is joining us this morning, as is Jakob Rosalski of Scythe and 1920 Plus fame. Thank you both for coming by today. Mike from Peach State Hobby, one of my favorite distributors, dropped in to say a very nice note here. He says, it's been a great year for us at Peach State Hobby and for me personally. That's great to hear, Mike. I'm glad to hear both of those things. And he says, your partnership has been a big part of both. Thank you for that. Thanks, Mike. That's really nice of you to say. I'm always happy to send you more business, and I appreciate you selling our games to a wide variety of retailers across the U.S. Dusty says, about how far into Starsight are you, and are you enjoying it? Yeah, that's one of the little topics I had for today. Starsight is the second of a Brandon Sanderson trilogy of books, kind of not light sci-fi. Well, yeah, I would say sci-fi. It's a young adult science fiction series. And Dusty, I am 82% of the way through. I read on my Kindle, so I only know it in terms of percentages. But I'm close to the end. I'm really enjoying it. And I look forward to getting to the end. And hopefully Sanderson will release the third, I think the final book in the trilogy, maybe next year. I did hear someone mention last week, I think Carol mentioned that he announced the date for the 4th book of the Stormlight Archives, which will be next November. So maybe we won't get another book in the Starsight series next year, but maybe it'll be a little bit after that. What did you think, Dusty? Are you enjoying it so far? Marshall says, have I played Wavelength yet? Well, I'll answer that and then I'll get to your other questions. So the answer is yes. We happened to play a game night last week. Last week I played Paladins of the West Kingdom for the second time, and I played Wavelength with a big group of people and had a lot of fun with it. It was an interesting one to play. Wavelength, it's a game, for those of you who don't know, it's a game where you play in teams, and it's a little hard to describe, but basically one person on a team is given a word and or given a spectrum, and they have to pick a word that fits on a specific spot on that spectrum that is unknown to the other players. So, for example, one of the ones that came up, this is a weird one. It was like unsexy animal and sexy animal. So kind of weird, silly categories like that. And then you randomly choose a spot on the spectrum. You don't choose it; it's randomly selected as to where the animal that you need to name needs to be. And then you name that animal, and everyone else has to kind of guess where on the spectrum between those two categories, those two ranges, your animal falls. Weird, but we had kind of silly fun about it. There's a lot of pressure on the person to give the clue. A little bit of it's tough to be on the spotlight when that happens, but we had a lot of fun with it. Marshall's other question here is, he says, interested in your thoughts on toyifying tabletop games aimed at the hobby market. Yeah, that's interesting because it does feel like a toy. Like there's this big plastic component, and it's not miniature. It feels like a toy component. And I think it's a pretty brilliant component. Honestly, I think it's. I don't necessarily know if I'd call it a toy, because toys I would call things that you just play with, where there's no. I don't want to say there's no point to playing with them, but there's no goal. You're not trying to win when you play with a toy. In Spectrum, or Wavelength, there is a goal that you're using that toy for, or that using that component for. So I would say it's more of a special component, and I think that's pretty cool. Derek says, have you ever paid for any advertising for any of your upcoming games? Have you had any success with paying for ads? Yeah, Derek, I have a couple of different posts about that on my blog. But the main thing that I paid for, so I paid for a couple things. One, I paid for Board Game Geek banner ads. I think they're pretty effective, depending on the ad and depending on the quality of what people click through to find after they click on the banner ad. And I pay Rodney. It's not quite advertising, but I pay Rodney at Watch It Played to make videos for our new games, our new products, most of them. And so while we get the dual use out of that, because Rodney helps people learn how to play the games, but it's also, Rodney has a pretty vast audience, so we're paying for exposure as well there. Those are the main two things. Otherwise, I do send out a lot of review copies and a lot of games to conventions, play and win sections at conventions, which is an expense, but I'm not actually paying those conventions and definitely not paying those reviewers. What else is going on? So recent post that I made a post last Friday or last Thursday about Instagram strategies used by publishers that are similar to Stonemaier games. So if you're looking for some, if you, I guess, run a publishing company and you're looking for different Instagram strategies, you can look through that list and see visual examples of what a bunch of different board game companies are doing for their Instagram strategies. There's some pretty cool strategies on there. And I also used that same list for my Sunday sit-down video, where I talked about my favorite games from all these different companies that have fairly similar goals and philosophies and principles as Stonemaier games. So it's a list of 18 different companies that I go through and talk about my favorite game from those different companies. That's my Sunday sit-down video on YouTube from this past week. Amin says, was I into birds before Wingspan? No, I wouldn't say I was. Growing up, we had a bird feeder right outside the window where I ate breakfast, so I enjoyed the view of the birds, but I didn't really know much about them, didn't study them in any way. Yeah. Corlin says, Scythe, the deck builder. Have I given any more thought to this? I sure hope so. Corlin, yeah, that was the top pick of spin-off games for the Scythe universe. So it's the one that I am considering the most seriously if I do make any new game in the Scythe world. What else have I been playing here? Oh, another one other blog entry. My blog entry yesterday, or what was yesterday? No, Monday, was about evergreen games, evergreen board games. So I looked at data from a website called ICV2 that collects top 10 sales lists twice a year from compiled from retailers and distributors and publishers, and they determine the top 10 best-selling games in brick and mortar stores and online and through any various outlets. And I took those lists and I compiled them, and I looked at the averages of the types of games that are selling continuously year after year, and came up with a top 14 list, games that have appeared at least 3 times over the last, I think, like 3 years on these lists, and saw some patterns there. Some of the patterns were that these evergreen games were around 40. They averaged 45 minutes long. They weighed 2.2 out of 5 on the complexity scale on Board Game Geek. Their ratings on Board Game Geek were vastly different. Some were very highly rated, some were not, and a few other categories there. So if you're interested in that, if you're thinking about games from a design or publishing perspective, and you're aiming for a game that will reach evergreen status, be sold year after year, many copies year after year, you might find some interesting data in that article. Froyland says, will you have a Jamie Stegmaier card representation for any of the Garphill games, just like Man vs. Meeple and Watch It Played did on Raiders of the North Sea? Not that I'm aware of, unless Shem wants to put something like that in the game. And really, generally, I discourage that. Some people have asked me about that in the past, and while I don't mind sneaking myself into my own games from time to time, it's always maybe for some reason just a little odd to see my face in other games from other companies. I'd rather have other people that really value that, because I think some people really get a kick out of seeing their face in those games, and I don't really care all that much. So I'd rather them get that placement. Amin says, would I ever fund a Kickstarter without the game as a reward? He says he's in Morocco and it's hard to ship worldwide at affordable prices, but I can provide a print and play copy. Do I think people will back it for a couple of dollars? I think I have seen a few campaigns that were purely print and play. But I mean, one important thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to ship. In fact, I would not recommend shipping from where you are anyway. I would recommend shipping from different fulfillment centers around the world that specialize in shipping. So I have recommendations on my website for fulfillment centers in Canada, in the US, in Europe, and in Australia that you can hire to ship the games to you. Wherever you produce them, you just produce the game wherever you want. Most people do it in China, but you can do it elsewhere. And then you ship it to those fulfillment centers, and they ship it to backers in those regions. What else is going on? I played some games, obviously, this past week. I mentioned Paladins of the West Kingdom, Wavelength. I also played through the Emergence of Shy Pluto campaign expansion for Space Base. Megan and I did that. It took us 5 games. We had a ton of fun with it. I played the Isle of Skye expansion, the Druids expansion, the other day. Had a lot of fun with that. And played Doppel So Clever for the first time, and the Magic Throne of Eldraine draft that I hosted on Saturday. So a lot of fun games over the last few days. And I'm hosting game night tonight as usual, so I'm excited to see what gets to the table tonight. Oh, chocolate of the day. I almost forgot. Keith, thank you for reminding me. I found this chocolate for sale. I might have even mentioned this before, because I had this a week or so ago, and I enjoyed it so much that I've been looking for it again. And it is delicious. It is some of the creamiest, most delicious milk chocolate I've ever had, right at the sweet spot for me of cocoa level. Really, really good. This is Endangered Species chocolate, for those of you who are listening to this on the podcast. Endangered Species chocolate, smooth and creamy milk chocolate, 48% cocoa. Amin says, how did I go about making a game about a production process, viticulture, fun to play with a lot of meaningful decisions? How did I design it for it to not just play itself? That's a tough question. I mean, the main thing I thought about throughout the design process was, is this fun? I'm constantly asking myself, is this fun? Are players having fun? Am I having fun? And so if the difference for me is that there are games that simulate real life. They don't really play themselves, but they simulate something versus games. So there's simulators versus games. And with viticulture, there were decisions that I made that diverged from the theme a little bit for the sake of fun. And an example of this is early on in the design of viticulture, your grapes would if you didn't use them, I think almost right away, at the end of the year, any grapes that you didn't use fell off your crush pad. They went bad, basically, as grapes do. Like, you can't just sit around year after year with the same grapes and turn them into wine. They go bad over time. So that would be the simulation if the grapes went bad and fell off your player mat. But it wasn't fun at all to have that happen. And we found it was a lot more fun to give players the freedom of letting their grapes age over time and giving them the freedom to choose when they actually wanted to turn those grapes into wine. So that was one area where we took what was a simulation and we turned it into what I think is a more fun game mechanism. So basically, to answer your question, I'm just always trying to pay attention to the fun, where players are having fun, where they're frustrated, and making decisions based on fun, not frustration, and avoiding frustration. What else is going on? Megan and I had a wonderful meal the other day, kind of an anniversary meal at a place called Savage here in St. Louis. And it was a meal kind of unlike one that I've ever had before, because it was a 12-course meal, which is a lot more courses than I usually order in any meal. But they were very small dishes. Many of them were just a single bite, and they were each meticulously crafted right in front of us. The chefs were preparing the food, not like on the bar in front of us, but kind of on an island right behind the bar that everyone in the restaurant was sitting around. We were all sitting around this bar. And the efficiency of it was really cool, because they basically seemed to schedule the reservations for the night so that 12 people would sit down at almost the exact same time. And that way the chefs could prepare 12 dishes simultaneously, the exact same 12 dishes simultaneously, and then serve them to all 12 guests. They weren't accepting orders or special requests or anything like that. Or there may have been dietary requests that they were aware of, but they were basically making the same exact thing for 12 people at the same exact time. It was so efficient and so cool to watch them do it. I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant like that, but I thought it kind of made me think about restaurants in a new way, because it was just so much more efficient than I think running a normal restaurant kitchen would be. In fact, I might need to do a blog about that. Now that I'm writing about it, I should do a blog about Savage in terms of from that angle, like the business perspective angle of it. I love learning from different businesses, from different types of different categories of business, and applying those lessons to my company. Chris says, can we get an Aussie Birds expansion for Wingspan, please? Yeah, well, our hope for Wingspan expansions is to make one expansion for every continent. So we're focusing on a bunch of different continents. So far, we've just done Europe, and now we're going to move on to a different continent next. You'll find out what that is, hopefully next year. Connie says that, did I see that Tom Vassell had Tapestry in his top 10 Euro games of 2019? I didn't see that, Connie, but that's great. I'll need to look at that list. I love looking at great Euro games, and I'm honored that he would put that in the list. So I'll make a note about that too. Tom Vassell, top 10 Euros. They've been doing so many end of year top 10 lists. I've barely kept up with them, but I did watch their biggest surprises and their overall top 10 games a couple days ago. I have some more questions here, but let me see any other topics that I should mention before I move on to that. Oh, I have a play test today that I'm really excited about. It's on my desk, so you can't quite see it here, but it's a new version of a game that we've been play testing for quite some time. Alan and I are going to sit down and try it. And this is one designed by other designers, but one that I've kind of taken a heavy hand in developing at certain times. And this is one of those times. So this version of the game is one that I've kind of taken what the designers have worked on, and I've re-implemented it in a way that I think might work a little bit better. And we'll see how that goes. The designer is great to work with. So they're very flexible about that type of thing. I try to be very respectful of what they put into it when I do something like this. But I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm going to have a play test in a couple hours that I hope goes well. We'll see how it goes in a few hours, though. Zoe says that she loves all the videos I produce, especially your top 10 list. Thank you. What are some of your favorite board game content creators? I have quite a few. And actually, let me find, I'll post in the comments below, because there's an easy way to see all of them. And it's basically to go through and look at the different content creators that I've featured on our charity auctions over the last few years. So yeah, I'll post a link below, and if you scroll down to the charities part and click on the links there, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, basically see 7 top 10 lists of creators that I really, really adore, that I follow very closely. I'll post that below. Right now, just so I can give you something out loud, I've really been enjoying the Co-op cast. If you enjoy listening to information about, like, it's mostly like a deep dive into the game design, but it's also a review about cooperative games. The Co-op cast is fantastic. And I just listened to the Secret Cabal today, the Secret Cabal Gaming podcast. I love the Board Game Design Lab. I love Ludology. So I listen to a lot of people who like to talk about the game design side of things, not just the reviews. Although Tom Vassell was mentioned earlier, I definitely listen to the Dice Tower, or mostly watch the Dice Tower channel, because Tom and the other creators there are really great. I like their opinions and what they say about games. Sean says, my group will play Bang the dice game as a filler until everyone shows up. But last night we played Bang the card game, compared to the dice game, it was such a slow gameplay and not fun. Have I ever played shortened games that you like, but then tried the full game? If so, what were your thoughts? That's a good question. If I ever played a game, like a longer version of a truncated game, that I didn't have fun. Well, okay, so I'll mention one thing. I don't know if this is quite your question, Sean, but I mentioned this in a video that I filmed. I don't think I posted it yet, about the Isle of Skye Druids expansion. So I just played the Isle of Skye Druids expansion. The Druids expansion essentially just adds 1 buy phase to each round of Isle of Skye. So it's the same exact game with 1 extra buy phase. There's another expansion and I love that. I think it's fantastic. I will almost always play with this expansion from now on. There's another expansion for Isle of Skye called the Journeyman expansion. I love what they were trying to do with it, but it basically doubled or even more the playing time of Isle of Skye. It changed the decisions quite a bit, and made them very different. And I didn't love it. I have to say, I thought I would. I played it once. I thought, okay, I'm going to play this a bunch. Played it again. I've never played it again. I always just return to the normal Isle of Skye. So it's the kind of the tale of 2 expansions there. I love the Druids expansion, how streamlined it is, how much it feels like the normal game. The game plays in pretty much the same amount of time, versus the Journeyman expansion, which turned it into, in my opinion, almost a completely different game. That's one example that I'll share here, just because I want to share something positive along with something a little bit negative there. Amin says, do I ever watch the Dice Tower live shows? Not live. I really stumble upon them when they're live, but I do watch the recorded versions of the live shows later. Byron says he loves seeing some Magic the Gathering love. Do I play regularly? No, my method for playing now, Byron, I play because I love it, but I also play it to learn from it as a designer. And so I basically host 1 draft for every new set. So I think that adds up to like 3 or 4 drafts a year. And that's the right amount for me in terms of money to spend, time that I want to spend on Magic, and the things that I want to learn from the game. So I used to play more. I used to play a lot more online, but it was a bit of a time suck and kind of a creative suck too, because I was spending a lot of creative energy either designing decks or even just during drafts, spending that creative energy on a draft. And I would rather spend that energy elsewhere. Yeah, but I still really love it, and I love the drafts that I host with my friends here. Chad says, how much input do I give your graphic designer? Do you find yourself having to give a lot of revisions, or do you trust the choices your designer makes? I would say I have to give my designer very little input, partially because Christine has learned over the years what I really like and what I look for. She's gotten very good at laying out rule books, so I don't have to lay out the rule book. She lays it out, and I give her some feedback, and then it's done. So I would say maybe like, in terms of like layout and graphic design and layout and icon design, I mean, she usually gives me a few options and I choose one, that type of feedback I give, but she is doing the vast majority of it. And then I'm like answering a few questions basically. So she's great to work with. I'm very lucky to have her prioritize my company and be a big part of my company, even though she is an independent contractor. Dusty says, on Instagram, it seems like the move to the new place has been good for your boys, Biddy and Walter. Those are my two cats, Biddy and Walter. He says there seem to be a lot more pictures of them together. Yeah, there are. They just seem to be hanging out a little bit more. Walter's still a little bit feisty sometimes, but there's more space here for them to spread out. They kind of picked their own spots that they're into, and they've kind of banded together a little bit at certain times, because I think they're still a little uncertain about what's happening, like why they're here, because they lived at my old place for many, many years, and so maybe that has brought them together a little bit. The one other topic that I had, it was just a little topic here, but I had a really interesting conference call with someone the other day, someone that I really admire. And it was basically a weird thing happened a few months ago, a weird coincidence where for many years I have read a blog written by a guy named Todd Satterson. He writes about business books, and he also publishes business books. And I got an email from Todd, and I think maybe I'm on his e-newsletter, and so I thought it was just an e-newsletter email, but then I realized that he was writing directly to me. Todd and I had never interacted, but he actually is a gamer, and so it's one of these cool things where someone that I have followed for many years happens to be a gamer and chose to reach out to me to say hi. And Todd and I had a Skype call yesterday, just chatting about stuff, something I rarely do, but I admire Todd so much that I was like, okay, why not? I'll have this chat with Todd and learn from him, and maybe he'll learn something from me. And we just had a really wonderful chat, comparing a lot between the board game publishing world and the book publishing world, with both of us, I think, expressing a little bit of jealousy for the other, because there are certain advantages in book publishing, tabletop publishing, that's much more difficult in tabletop publishing, and there are certain advantages in tabletop publishing that you can't find in book publishing. Like an example of both would be for tabletop publishing, it is very difficult to simultaneously release a tabletop version of the game and a digital version of the tabletop game. Whereas with a book, it's very easy to do that now. On the reverse side, once you design a game if the game is successful, it is fairly easy to sell a decent number of expansions for that game, to make and sell those expansions. But there isn't really a corollary with books. Books don't often have expansions. Like, you don't often read a 10-chapter book and then have the opportunity to buy an 11th chapter as an add-on, as an expansion. So Todd was a little bit jealous about that. But it was just a really cool chat. And I mentioned this earlier in the post. I love finding connections between the board game industry and other industries, and seeing what I can learn from them. And that's something I love to discuss. So if you ever think of anything like that and want to post it in one of these channels or on my blog when I write about other businesses, I love to hear that kind of stuff. I love to think about my industry from different angles, especially from the perspective of other industries. Gerald says, how's your brainstorming going for your deck builder? Are you trying to think of a new twist? Yeah, it's going really well. I have gotten it to the table 2 times already, but there's still a lot more brainstorming to be done before I can even call it an early design. But yeah, so far I would say there are 3 big twists that I haven't seen in other deck building games. So that's I don't know if that will end up being in the final version, but currently that is the case. I am looking to do something different that hasn't been done in another deck building game, while still retaining some of the great things about deck building games. Brennan says, thoughts on dexterity games? I'm thinking of Pitch Car or Ice Cool. I'm guessing you would. Yeah, I played both of those games. What is my favorite dexterity game? I love Coconuts. I would say Coconuts is my favorite dexterity game. I think I have, I let a friend have it, actually, because I hadn't played it for a while, and I figured his kids would enjoy it. But I would say Coconuts is my favorite. I really, really enjoyed Coconuts. Corlin says, what can we expect from Stow Meyer in 2020? Multiple new games, expansions, conventions. I love watching your company grow. Well, thank you, Corlin. Our normal pace, I think, is what we'll aim for next year, which is the release of 1 or 2 new games, as well as 1 or 2 new expansions. I think most likely the expansions will, actually next year we might have 3 expansions, because there's the My Little Scythe expansion, which I'll be talking about pretty soon. There's hopefully a Tapestry expansion and hopefully a Wingspan expansion next year. In terms of new games, I will talk about them much closer to when they're ready, but right now we're on target for 2 new games. It's possible it will just be 1, but right now we're looking at 2. Yeah. And speaking of new games, I'm going to be very vague here, but I had a huge breakthrough revelation in my open world exploration game the other day, which is still as big as it is, and how much content I have for it is still kind of, I'm learning my way through this design. But I have a huge breakthrough that I'm really, really excited about. I can't even share what it is, but I just wanted to share my excitement for it because I am super, super excited about this game. And I hope to talk more about it in the future. I definitely will talk about more about it in the future. But right now, I just want to share my excitement. Amin says, do I use a lot of math when designing games? I wouldn't say a lot. I would say I try to use enough math. So there's the math from looking at playtesting data and evaluating it and learning from that data. There's that side of things. There's also the math of giving things value in games. So if you have resources that convert into victory points or convert into each other, trying to keep those ratios consistent throughout the game and figuring out the math behind those different ratios, those different conversions. So I do think about that quite a bit. Nathaniel says, how do you and Megan's games taste differ, and what about them are similar? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say we're fairly similar. Like, we're both ambi gamers in that we're willing to try a pretty wide variety of games. Both of us generally avoid games with a lot of direct combat and direct conflict and take that, but there are exceptions to that. I would say that maybe the one main difference is that I do really like auction games and games with negotiation, games like Trade on the Tigris and QE come to mind. And for Megan, there are exceptions to that, but I think she generally gravitates away from that style of game. Chad says, his puppy Fenris has surgery this Friday. Oh, I'm sorry, Chad. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Chad has kind of kept us in the loop about his puppy over the time that he's had him. He named the puppy Fenris after the Rise of Fenris, the Scythe expansion. And I'm hoping he's okay, Chad. I'm sorry to hear about that. I'll be thinking about Fenris on Friday. Debbie says, can I talk a little bit about project management and how you approach planning for your company? Yeah, Debbie, thanks for asking about that. Project management is a huge part of my job. I don't know how well exactly I do it, but there are a few different methods that I use to basically organize things and just remember things at different stages in the boarding process. One of those is that I have a long spreadsheet that reminds me of different things that I need to do for games pretty much when they're kind of near the end of the design process. There is a lot of project management that goes into the game before that point, but that spreadsheet comes in near when we're entering production, or it reminds me of all the different things, all the people that I need to reach out to and have them do different things. Before that, there isn't as much of a set schedule to it, so I don't have like reminders set about it, but I basically just try to stay in touch with people at the right times. I know that's a very vague answer, so it's kind of become second nature for me to know, okay, the game is in playtesting now, so I need to reach out to playtesters, I need to follow up with playtesters, I need to then compile that and send it to other people. I'm in constant contact with my publisher. And what else? What's the other side of things? Oh, I use Basecamp with my graphic designer, and sometimes a few other people use that. I use Dropbox a lot. I don't know. It's a little haphazard. As you can see, I use a lot of different web applications to manage the process and to help me plan. But a lot of it is kind of second nature. Not everything is reported anywhere on a spreadsheet or reminded me on anything. It's kind of just become like what I do. So it's a little bit hard for me to describe it. But I do have some blog entries about it because it's such a big part of my job. And I think sometimes Kickstarter creators in particular don't realize just how much they will have a job as a project manager once they launch that Kickstarter campaign. Amin says, a few days ago, I tried to find a book about book publishing to help me understand the board game publishing better. Do I have a recommendation? I don't have a recommendation offhand about a book about book publishing. I'm sure they're out there, but none come to mind. Maybe someone else in the comments can help out with that. Christopher says, with the re-releases from Pegasus Spiel of the Epic Talisman game and its expansions, what's your take on Epic all-day games? There's a great deal of love for this game. Easy to learn, very simple to play, and epic in every aspect. Do you think that you will design a game that incorporates character leveling and an adventure like the Talisman game, or even a niche epic game that takes 3 to 4 hours to play? So Christopher, I love that you've had an awesome experience with Talisman. I've never played it, and it's actually very rare that I'll play a game that plays longer than 2.5 hours. My attention span tends to drift at that point, I found, where that's kind of like where I want most games to conclude, if not earlier than that. So I have played longer games. I've played the Game of Thrones game. I've played Twilight Imperium. What else have I played that's really, really long? Those are the main two, I think. I think there's one more. Oh, I played Eclipse. And all of them, my impression as I was playing it and after I played it was, I'm glad I played this. I don't really want to do this again. It's too long for me. I would have rather played 3 to 4 other games in this span of time. That's just me. It's definitely not a judgment on anyone else who enjoys those games. I know those games are very, very popular. So that's just my personal preference. And so would I ever design a game that does that? Almost definitely not. I am working on a game that, so I had designed campaign games that enable players to say, okay, should we play game 2? We just played game 1. Do we want to play game 2 right away? So they can turn it into a more epic experience if they want to, but they have the flexibility to do so. It's not the game telling them you need to sit here for 4 or 5 hours. Yeah. Dusty says, so Dusty's referring to a codename. I think Dusty's making a slight assumption here that Codename Wild is a game that I was talking about a few minutes ago. I won't say whether or not that is because I don't talk about what the codenames are. But Dusty, yeah, sometimes I show the progress for my games or all of our games on a progress chart on our website, on the news section of our website, and it's always in our e-newsletter. And sometimes you might see that the games don't move forward for a while, which means that they're still being worked on, but maybe a certain part of the process is taking longer than normal, or other games have priority, or we're stuck on something, or I'm stuck on something in that game. And so, yeah, that tends to happen with a bunch of games. So sometimes you just won't see progress being made for a while, even though the game is actively being worked on. Carol says, have I made much progress in Clank Legacy? She just started painting their minis and hope to start after Christmas. So I think the last time I talked about this, we had played game 3, but last week, the couple that we're playing with, one of them was sick, and this past week we had a huge snowstorm, so we didn't play this past Monday. So we're hoping to play on next Monday, play game 4, maybe even more, because maybe we'll have to schedule maybe a session where we play 2 games, because we will have a few days where, and Megan at least is off work for a few days. So we'll see about that. But right now we only completed game 3 of Clank Legacy. Dan says, do I prefer sleeves, and do I normally sleeve my games? I normally do not sleeve my games, Dan. But I will say that I really like shuffling with sleeves. I like just pushing the cards together in the sleeves. That is my preferred method of shuffling. But I rarely do it. I really take the time to sleeve. I think I actually have a bunch of sleeves here. Yeah, I have hundreds of sleeves that I could use, but I just rarely think to do so. Chad says, when creating a Euro game, do I find it's easier to collect a lot of innovative ways to get points and then try to fit a theme into it? Or do I find it easier to start from a theme and then figure out thematic ways to collect points? I don't know if I actually do either of those, Chad, so much. I mean, my method is usually I think of either a theme or a mechanism that I'm excited about, and immediately I try to find a mechanism to match that theme or a theme to match that mechanism. I'm not thinking about points at all during the initial game design process. I'm just thinking about the cool mechanism or the cool theme that I want to work, and figuring out if it does work or not. And then eventually I might, if it gets far enough, eventually I might start thinking about points or how players win, which isn't always points. But yeah, so that definitely is not part of the early brainstorming process, that how players get points. That comes along much later for me. Yeah, that's all the questions that we have so far. I'll wait to see if there are a few more questions. We could end it a little bit early today. I have one more thing I need to do before today's playtest. I think I've run out of general topics. The topics, in case you guys want me to recap anything here, the topics I talked about are that I'm excited about the new Star Wars movie. I saw Jumanji this past weekend. My Sunday sit down and my Instagram post or my Facebook post last week were about companies, other publishing companies that are similar to Stonemaier Games, or they have similar goals and principles. Talked a little bit about the snow and the ice here in St. Louis. I talked about my blog on Monday about evergreen games, evergreen best-selling games. My recent plays of the Space-Based expansion, the Isle of Skye expansion, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Doppel So Clever, Wavelength, and Magic the Gathering, Throne of Eldraine. Talked about my anniversary meal at Savage, my fun chat with book publisher Todd Satterson, my chocolate of the day, which was this chocolate, endangered species, smooth, creamy milk chocolate, and that I'm excited about a development that I have in my open world game, and excited about a playtest that I'm running today, which is not the open world game. I'll say that. It's a different game that I am really excited about as well. What else is going on with our games? Anything else I should reveal? We're nearing the end of the proofreading process for a game that will enter production, I think, right after Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year is a little bit early this year, so it'll enter production right after that is what we're aiming for. And I'm actually working on the final quote for that today. Today I'll also probably be working on going over Tapestry expansion playtest results. We're through several waves of blind playtesting for the Tapestry expansion. Yeah, I think that's all about the games going on right now. Yeah, let me see if there are any other questions. Sean says, how many copies of the Scythe Artist Edition were made? So the Scythe Art Connoisseur Edition. It's whatever the number is on the Kickstarter page. I think it was around 2,500, 2,000, 2,500. It's pretty much like exactly the number, maybe with a small buffer of the number of backers who backed it on Kickstarter, because we only made it enough for those backers. Stephanie says, am I attending any big conventions in 2020? No, Stephanie. In fact, I think the only convention that I currently, well, two small conventions I'm planning on attending are Geekway Mini here in St. Louis and Geekway to the West here in St. Louis. I might drop in at Gen Con for a day just for some meetings, but I don't plan on really being a full attendee there. And you never know, there could be other ones. Someone mentioned Board Game Geek Spring earlier. There might be other ones, but the conventions just aren't a big part of our marketing strategy or a big part of how I prioritize my time. I love playing games. I love going to the conventions just to play games, but it's very convenient for me to do that in St. Louis, not as convenient for me to do that in other cities. But what about you, Stephanie? What conventions are you excited about in 2020? Tony says, what's for Christmas dinner? A friend of ours said, I think a friend is hosting Christmas dinner, so I think it'll be Chinese food, but I'm not sure. The friend is not Chinese, but I think he typically makes or buys Chinese food for Christmas dinner. Amin says, is the board game industry one where you have to interact with tons of people to succeed? I don't think so. I think it helps. I think it helps to at least pay attention to other people, to correspond a little bit, to find people that you connect with, that you share goals and principles with, and connect with those people. But I don't think you necessarily need to be a networker to succeed in the board game industry. Speaking of someone who actually is very good at networking, Connor McGooey just joined us from Inside Up Games. Connor's company is one of the companies that I talked about in terms of Instagram strategies and companies that are similar to Stonemaier Games in terms of goals and principles. And as usual, my favorite game from Connor's company is Summit. Summit is an awesome game about climbing a mountain. Joe says, do I do a lot of playtesting for non-Stonemaier games? And Joe, the answer is, unfortunately, I do almost no playtesting at all for non-Stow Meyer games, just because I have to prioritize my company. So I used to do that a lot more when we were starting out. I would playtest someone else's game, and maybe they would playtest my game. There was that exchange, but now I have to prioritize my time, and that time is not to be spent on games that we're not publishing. Yeah. Amin says, did your Kickstarter book, A Crowdfunder Strategy Guide, sell as much as you wanted? I actually wouldn't say that my priority was to sell a lot of copies. I'll say that, let me clarify that, because my goal with the book was to help a lot of people, was to help other crowdfunders and entrepreneurs and people who wanted to use Kickstarter and the other crowdfunding platforms. So in that way, yes, I wanted the book to get in a lot of people's hands to help them. The goal was not to make money off of it, or to the sales numbers themselves were not the goal. The goal was just to help people. So do I think that has been accomplished? I don't know. I don't think, I think the book maybe has sold 5,000, 6,000, maybe 10,000 copies, which is not a ton. So if it's only helping that number of people, I wish it could have helped more people. But hopefully, for those who haven't discovered the book, that they've gotten some value from my Kickstarter Lessons blog instead. Carol says, but thank you for mentioning the book. I appreciate you bringing that up. Carol says, My Little Scythe, the My Little Scythe expansion is early next year, right? Yes. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I do know. I have a pretty good idea of the exact date, but I should start to be talking about it. I should start talking about it in early 2020. Yeah. And I'm glad your son's excited about it. George says, I think choosing a good theme is quite challenging in designing a game in order to match the mechanisms. Did it happen to you to change the theme of a game, let's say in the middle of the design process? So basically, have I ever changed the theme of a game midway through a design process? And I don't think I ever have. No, I've certainly changed it during the early brainstorming process, but never really late in the process. Stephanie says that she will be selling her first solo design at my first Gen Con booth ever. Very cool, Stephanie. Yeah, I hope that goes well. Chad says, what have I found to be the most innovative way to use a simple card in a game? A simple card. I certainly cannot name the most innovative way, but I can name something that comes to mind. I recently played, it wasn't Pillars of the Earth. It was the next game in the Pillars of the Earth series. World Without End? Yeah, World Without End. And there's this card that comes out. It's a competitive game, but there's this card that comes out every round. It's a square card with things in the corners. And the active player orients that card in such a way so that each of the corners are pointing towards a different player, and that player gets the bonus in that corner. But the card also has an event on it that happens, and it has an arrow that points to a specific thing that means something else that moves on a track. And so there's all these interesting decision points in just in the orientation you choose for this one square card that I thought was really clever, really brilliant. Tony says that the new episode of The Mandalorian releases today, not Friday this week. I did not know that. That's awesome. Wow. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I need to, we'll have to watch that at dinner tonight. Thanks for letting me know, Tony. Yeah, I had no idea. Connor says that he read my book twice in preparation for Summit's Kickstarter. Thank you, Connor. That's great to hear. Connor says, which game that isn't one of yours have I been most excited about playing lately, and why? Well, Megan and I just played through the Emergence of Shy Pluto expansion campaign for Space Base. I had a ton of fun with it. So that was, for 5 games, that was the game that I was most excited to play. I do have Arctic Scavengers on my 2-play table over here. I really do want to play that. I played it only once, but I want to get it back to the table. I played it once like 2 years ago. So that one's probably the one that I'm most excited to play tonight, if it's a possibility. And Clank Legacy too. That's an ongoing campaign. I'm really excited to get back to that. What about you, Connor? What would you answer for that? Ivan says, I saw this new mechanism in games where you start with a drawback, but later you can transform it into an advantage. For example, your faction cannot collect green cubes, but later you can upgrade to gain 2 green cubes. How do I feel about that mechanism, and will I put it in future games? I certainly don't know if I can put it in future games, but how do I feel about it? I can answer that. That you start with a drawback and then it turns into something powerful. Oh, I think, are you referring to Vindication? I think Vindication does something like that. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I like letting players feel more powerful. So if that means making them start off with a slightly punitive thing that they need to work their way out of and suddenly get a lot more powerful as a result, I think that's one way to do it. I think it's one way to show, like, give players a sense of progression and powering up in a game. I like those things. So I don't know if I'd use that exact mechanism, but I like that idea, that core idea. Yeah. Well, I think I've certainly covered all the topics that I meant to cover today, and I don't think I see any other questions here. So I may put the finishing touches on a prototype that I need to play test this afternoon, and go ahead and take care of that. So thank you so much for joining me for this week's not Sunday Sit Down. This is the Facebook Live. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them. The best place to post them after this video will be on the YouTube version of this video. That's the easiest place for me to get alerts for them. So maybe I'll see you there. Oh, Sean says, 2 other quick questions here. Amin says, how long do I usually work without having a break? Maybe an hour, and then I'll not really take a full break, but maybe I'll get up and get a new glass of water or something like that. And Sean says, will I live cast next week? And I don't know yet, Sean. Probably not. I think most people are pretty busy on Christmas, but if I don't, I will find another day, maybe even just at random, to live cast a little bit. So just keep your subscriptions to the Stow Meyer Games Facebook page, and you'll get a notification whenever I decide to go live next week. I'll play it by ear. Oh, looks like I have a few more questions before I go. Connor says, what makes you want to get a game back to the table? Is it the fun? Is it that you want to improve your play for better understanding? I would say more the first 2. If a game is fun, I certainly want to get back to it. If a game makes me feel clever, I want to get back to it. And yeah, often, like, if I feel like I could have done something differently and done a little bit better in the last play of the game, then that makes me want to get it back to the table too. Sometimes it's also asymmetry. I want to try a new faction. I really enjoy one faction. I want to try another one. I enjoy that too. A few more questions coming in at the last minute here. Gavin says, any clues on your prototype projects? What genre are you tinkering with? Well, the one that I mentioned fairly publicly is the open world exploration cooperative game. I'm not going to reveal the one that I'm working on today, though. I appreciate your curiosity. Okay, I think that's it. Have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas. Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate that. Happy holidays in general. I'll be back sometime next week, not necessarily on Christmas Day, but sometime next week for a Facebook Livecast. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.